And I was plopped in the middle of Bolivia in the Altiplano, pretty high up, barely able to take a full breath. The altitude is a factor, and then the temperature is a factor because at night it gets below freezing. I was completely by myself. I literally wore every single layer of clothing that I brought with me. So that included, I want to say, 4 jackets, 2 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of gloves, 2 beanies, 3 pairs of socks. I had it all on when I was sleeping. And then I would wake up in this nothingness and be like, where am I going? My GPS is flat. How do I get anywhere? I can't see. I have no landmark for where I need to go. So what do? I'm on this endless treadmill of nothingness.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on 2 wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, McKenzie Barney. Now, I first spoke with McKenzie just over 1 year ago, shortly after she'd completed a bike adventure that saw her cycle 29,000 kilometres across 5 continents. Since then, McKenzie has gone on to release an award-winning feature documentary aptly named Cycling the World, showcasing her experiences from taking such a huge journey. Now, I don't know about you listeners, but I often wonder when I interview guests so soon after they've completed such a goal, just how much their views and reflections on their experiences change with the passage of time. What lessons become more stark as days turn into weeks, months, and then years? In McKenzie's case, she's also been spending so much of her time touring her film, as well as supporting her partner James with his own book release tour. So it's an experience that has become such a huge part of her life now, and a stark change from being out on the road, often solo, with no one but your own thoughts to contend with. More recently, McKenzie has put those thoughts into words as she has begun penning out her own book. And so what a perfect opportunity for me, the podcaster, to jump on in, interview McKenzie once again, and get to ask her some deeper questions about her experiences and reflections from that monumental trip. McKenzie, welcome back to the show.
It's so great to talk to you again, Bella. I am honored to be on the show again, and wow, how time has flown. A year has passed.
I still remember, McKenzie, leading up to interviewing you, and you were actually still on your tour at that stage. You were, I'd like to think you were in Ecuador, wild camping with volcano views, and knowing that we were going to do this interview. And then when it came to it, I was like, I can't believe I'm interviewing someone who's done something just straight after. It's going to be interesting to see what comes out now that the thoughts have marinated and simmered in your mind over a year and you've had so much time in it to reflect back on. But I normally start my show with the same question for all my guests. I've already asked it for you, so I'm changing it up a little bit. And the question I'm starting the show with this time, McKenzie, is, do you remember the very first day on your Cycle the World bike tour?
Yes, I do. And this is a nod to anyone who is just starting out because I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I had flown into Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, with pretty much only the clothes on my back and a small backpack, and had this idea that I wanted to make it to Hanoi by bicycle within 30 days. But the problem was that I didn't have a bicycle. So I had to immediately go to a bike shop and ask if they had any affordable used bikes, which a $100 mountain bike happened to be for sale that happened to be my size. And so I bought that bike. I threw on a few bike packing bags, which I had no idea what they were. And I was just really excited that I had that top tube bag so I could see my phone, which was going to act as my GPS. And I had a few, hydration cages. And other than that, I cycled in my sandals. I had my backpack and I had no tent, which was kind of minimizing how much anxiety I would have around this very kind of jumping in the fire of bike packing, my first experience solo, completely alone, I just decided, you know what? Don't bring a tent. Stop at guest houses and homestays along the way. And I hopped on that used mountain bike the next morning, started cycling, and within 30 days, I made it to Hanoi. So that first day for me was so vivid in the sense of landing in a foreign country, in a foreign city with a foreign language, having no idea what I was even going to eat, let alone how I was going to get out of this city of Saigon, which is, millions of people. And how was I going to get out? What were the main arteries of the city? What was my route? Oh, by the way, what was my vehicle of choice? Like, what was this bike going to be? There were so many unknowns. And so in that sense, this memory really sticks out and is vivid. Like I could reach out and touch it. This was yesterday for me.
There's so many things that come to mind there. Firstly is the idea that you've landed there with a backpack. And listeners, I guess a nod to the backstory behind McKenzie is this might have been the first day of a bike tour, but McKenzie, by this stage, you were a very well-travelled through hiker. So to me, the idea that you've turned up with a backpack knowing that's all you needed is probably a nod to your through hiking experience and probably minimalist weight from that perspective. But also, like landing there in Vietnam, what a hectic city to start the tour from as well. So I don't know, like embracing the madness of traffic organised chaos. It's almost like it seems to flow, and it shouldn't if you stand back and look at it with a Westerner's viewpoint of what road rules look like, but it's just, there's a flow to it. And then also I really love the idea that you knew that you needed to ease your way into learning the ropes in a way by, I'm not going to overwhelm myself with the idea of needing to camp. I'm going to just set myself up for success and stay at guest houses. What do you think gave you the knowledge that that was something that you needed to account for?
That's a really great question. I think in a lot of this reflection of writing my memoir right now, there's a balance between structure and fluidity that you need to strike on an adventure. So in that sense, you need to be aware of where you're going into, especially as a solo traveler, especially as a solo female traveler. You need to be well-researched enough that you know things like the climate, the terrain, maybe your potential route, your beginning and end points, the political situation and climate. And then you can progress into this flow, right? So by almost creating that blueprint, if you will, and structure for what I needed to feel successful on this trip, that might be eliminating some extra layers of mental processing that were just going to be too much for me to have to consider, too much newness, right? And I think that the beginner's mindset for me is something that I talk about a lot in the film and in my speeches, but this is Vietnam. In my experience, the beginner's mindset was epitomized in Vietnam because everything is so new to you. Again, the language, the cuisine, the smells, the people, right? The city, it's so foreign and so new that it actually forces you to pay attention more. And it slows down time more. I know that was a very roundabout way of answering your question about eliminating a step of the planning, but I think when this is probably a bit subconscious to me after, at this point in Vietnam, after all of my through hiking experiences, but kind of taking inventory of the structure versus the fluidity and knowing that when you're going into something completely foreign and unknown, your senses are going to be so heightened. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself.
It's also the other interesting thing that comes to me there as well. I recently interviewed another awesome solo female traveller, Rika Schmies from Germany. Hi, Rika. And she, similar to you, McKenzie, was setting out on a big journey, having never done it before. The interesting thing about Rika was she made herself buy some good gear as a way of forcing herself to actually take the step and doing the thing, as opposed for it to just being this thought that she wished she would do, but talked herself out of doing. So she didn't sort of land somewhere without a bike. She purposefully got a bike that would be fine, and she got a good tent and stuff. But what Rika did was she started out in areas of familiarity, though, where she would feel a little bit more safe. So almost a nod to yourself there. She had pre-thought, if I'm a beginner, what am I going to be anxious about? And how do I set myself up for success to be able to keep doing the thing and grow into it? So, but where it differs from you is you're totally out of your comfort zone as soon as you land there. Everything is so foreign. And the thought that you need to be so present because your senses are heightened and alert, which makes you so aware of everything that's going on. But I guess that's also the beauty of bike travel to totally different foreign places, isn't it? Because you're aware of things 100% of the time.
Yes, and that's the beauty of the bicycle. I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, a fellow bike packer, because I'm talking to you in Thailand. I'm actually in Thailand, and we were kind of comparing walking and cycling, right? And that's something that I have organically had to play this comparison game of from this through hiking background. You know, the Pacific Crest Trail and the Greater Patagonian Trail in Chile and in Nepal and the Everest Base Camp in Annapurna and Colorado Trail and a bit in India. And so my kind of progression from the cadence of 2 feet to 2 wheels has had me thinking a lot about how these are they're different sports. They're not the same, you know, you can't really compare them that much, but what you can compare is the meditation, the moving meditation of them. And on a bike, the speed that you're going, you're almost like taking so much in at once. And the beauty of that is that you're able to be present, but you're also able to like calm down what's happening in your own mind. So it is this moving meditation that you're able to access on 2 wheels.
Yeah, I always remember it was when I was starting out with cycling, and I say cycling as opposed to bike travel because I was definitely someone that rode bikes for sport and fun before I rode bikes to go and travel to places. And someone that I was riding with who was a psychologist, and I was saying, gee, when I ride my bike, it helps me calm my mind. And she goes, it's because when your heart rate gets over a certain amount, you can't think about anything other than what you're actually actively doing. That's sort of a nod to what you're saying there. You know, that cadence of bike travel, it's forcing you to just be in the moment because you can't sort of think about all these other things that are going on in your head as well. I have to ask, and I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, do you miss the through hiking? Like you transitioned to biking, but you grounded yourself in through hiking. Do you miss the slower cadence of step by step as opposed to pedal turn by pedal turn?
Yes, and I think the reason for that is what you just said, that the psychologist had said about your heart rate. I think when you keep it at a certain level of the walking level with your heart rate, you're able to work through, it's a catharsis. I found that I was able to work through a lot of, I call it excavating layers on hiking. It's also a lot more quiet. You're more immersed in nature. Now, I say that, take that with a grain of salt, because if you go on certain bikepacking and dirt touring routes, like I was in Peru, with your bicycle, you can access that as well. But I do think that to what you just said, it all really makes sense with on a bicycle, you're in a flow state a little bit more because of being over that heart rate threshold, right? And then when you're walking, it's almost this, again, it's this peeling back of layers. So maybe it's best to start at the beginning for the sake of our conversation and the sake of where I'm at with the self-analysis that comes with a memoir writing process. And a year removed from finishing this trip, I had to ask myself, where did this all start? Like, really, where did this all start? So to answer your first question, the first day of my tour wasn't necessarily in Ho Chi Minh. It was I could probably trace it back to when I was raised in Seattle, Washington in the United States, very close to the Cascade Mountains, and developed this deep affinity for the natural world as I was a young girl growing up. And I read a lot, and I had a lot of role models. A lot of those role models were on the 1999 World Cup team, which this was the USA World Cup team for soccer. And those women taught me to, dream big. And I guess I took it a little bit literal. I went and kind of played soccer for a lot of my life and was very fortunate to play collegiately in the United States. So I played in university, and then I kind of opened my creative side of my brain up to filmmaking, which was my storytelling love. And I got into filmmaking. And long story short, with filmmaking, I had a lot of formulative moments. An Iceland surf photography expedition that opened my world up to becoming an adventure filmmaker, and that could be a possibility. And I worked for an ad agency in LA, wasn't necessarily for me, is for a lot of people, but didn't check my boxes. Did some marketing work in San Diego, same thing, wasn't necessarily for me. Went to New York, the concrete jungle, where dreams are made of, and I should be able to, make myself as a film producer. And was very fortunate to land on my feet there and have a mentorship, I would say, from someone who basically showed me the ropes with production. And I, was able to win some Emmy Awards and ended up filming a lot of my icons growing up in the sports world, bringing that full circle. And so by every means of society's expectations at this point, I should have been happy. I had made it. Like I had really blood, sweat, and tears, 12 plus hour work days in New York, working 3 jobs. I was like working my butt off to get there. And I got there and realized, wait, there's something missing. I feel a little bit empty. And maybe people listening can relate to that. I know a lot of people can. But that emptiness, I was like, what is this? And I had some influences at that time, other people who had thru hiked. And this world of thru hiking, I gravitated towards because it was like physical, something that I could go out and like tangibly, I could go from point A to point B. So that's why I initially seeked out thru hiking. But what I didn't realize is that lasts for about 2 weeks. And this is the same with biking. And then once your body's fit, your legs just know what to do. And it becomes a mind game. It is a complete mental game. So I think that I went through hiking for a number of years. I mean, maybe 6, 7 years. I was kind of in and out of different through hikes. And through hikes are long distance end-to-end hikes that last multiple months and usually span the length of a country or a continent. I think my through hikes were my self-prescribed wildfire in a way, in a sense of everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I was, I needed to remove it. And I needed to go to nature. I needed to go to somewhere where I could be quiet and peel back layers. And I'm talking, let's go right into it. Identity layers, right? So who is McKenzie as my job, my loved ones, my car, my things, my rent, everything, remove it all, go to the woods, live in the wilderness for 4 to 6 months, and see what happens. And of course, what happened is I peeled back the layers of what I ended up with what I truly need, who I truly am. But the problem was that it was this prescribed wildfire. And I didn't know then, like, where is my path? Who am I? So I had to like collect these embers, if you will, and start to create myself. Well, how am I going to create myself? Well, I guess the next cadence, the next thing that called me was bikepacking. Was 2 wheels. And it was going from nature where I was able to get so quiet and so removed from society. My ground zero level, like now I have something to build off of. And I had to go back into the world. But I didn't want to just go back into the world, 9 to 5, have a vehicle, like get a mortgage. I wanted to go back in the world in this way that I had just learned, earning the miles, earning the memories and the experiences. So that's why I went to cycling.
Is it also, when you were talking about going back into the world and, moving on from through hiking and step by step to, cycling, is it by the very act of, unless you're somewhere like the Peru Great Divide or something like that, where you're really out there and remote, you're invariably going to be finding yourself in places like Ho Chi Minh or through Vietnam or through Europe or through Africa, through villages where you're the only new stranger out there, so you're the attraction for every person in that village. Was it the idea that biking would giving you the element of the nature immersion that through hiking gave you, but biking would also put you into the chaos up front there of people interactions a lot more as well?
Absolutely. Like understanding who I was amidst an environment, amidst other people. And kind of in this recollection phase that I'm in, it was the people who actually were the milestones along the way. Those were the biggest interactions and kind of indicators of my path. And that's also why I never really stuck to ride my GPS or Strava or Komoot or anything. I never pre-programmed my route. Yeah, that's a big one.
So it always happened organically.
It happened organically. It was this like intentional. I kind of look at the bike ride as, in total, because we had this thing called the pandemic in between Vietnam and Europe for me.
Just that little thing.
Just that little thing. In total, it was about 3 years. And I kind of think of it as my, we don't really take these in our modern culture these days, or at least my culture doesn't, but like pilgrimage, right? Rite of passage, walkabout. I think of it as that for me. And the whole time I didn't know exactly why I was doing it. I just knew that it felt right.
You started in Vietnam, then you crossed Europe solo. You went down the length of Africa with your partner, James, and then you set off solo across Australia, New Zealand, and then through South America. When you were talking about these wildfires, the idea of a through hike is your point A and your point B, you know where you're going to end. You never had the whole world tour as your big bike tour. It was always piece by piece. When did it become really evident that the world thing was going to be a thing for you?
Great question. So the entire bike goal for me, once Vietnam happened, was to get to Africa, to do Cairo to Cape Town.
Why? Why was Cairo to Cape Town such a big deal?
All right. Basically, the on the surface answer is that in this niche that you and I live in, this subculture of long distance adventures.
Yeah, where we see the abnormal and make it normal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ordinary people hoping to do extraordinary things, right?
Yeah, where the 0.1% of the population is your entire algorithm.
Oh, I love that one. That's so good. So you hear of a lot of routes thrown around the campfire, and you start to gravitate towards those areas. So that's the on the surface answer. But below the surface, there is a bit of depth to that. When I was 21 in university, I organized a trip to South Africa with a lot of my teammates, some of my family, some of my friends. And we went to South Africa and did a bit of a volunteering trip. So that had a lot of influence on why I wanted to do Cairo to Cape Town, because on that trip, I found, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but it's Rian something. And he wrote a book about cycling around all of Africa. And it took him 2 years, I believe. And so that book kind of planted a seed. It's funny when you start to rewind, you see where these seeds started. And then, of course, around the campfire, you hear of all these different routes and Mark Beaumont's Cairo to Cape Town. We all know, the legend of Mark Beaumont. So that really kind of stuck out. And I looked into the Tour d'Afrique, I think it's called, and Cairo to Cape Town, and just was like, this is something I don't know what it is, but I feel called to do this. And so when I first got together with Jim, I kind of told him, like, that's something I need to go do. And he kept checking in every year, like, oh, are we really going to do this? And I was like, please, can you come with me? And so when I kind of knew that I wanted to do this, that Jim was going to come with me and we were going to cycle Cairo to Cape Town, which was supposed to happen in 2020. Of course, nothing, everyone's plans were put on hold. Exactly. So 2021, it happens. And what I wanted to do before that was really kind of prove that I was able to handle and enjoyed bike packing by myself. So I wanted to feel kind of strong in my own right of biking, camping, fixing mechanicals. I wanted to prove it to myself that I was bike packing for all the right reasons. So that's why after Vietnam, I went and solo cycled from Istanbul, Turkey, northbound to Amsterdam, Netherlands. And I did that for 6 weeks before Africa, before joining Jim. So then to answer your question, towards the end of Africa, we crossed paths with who now holds the record for the fastest married couple, a Guinness Book World Records, to cycle the world, David and Caroline. And they told us about this metric of 29,000 kilometers. And something dinged in my head, and that was my light bulb moment of, hey, maybe I'll be content if I hit 29,000 kilometers. So after Africa, I started planning for that and decided to do the rest solo, to the encouragement of my partner too, which was pretty cool.
You know, Mac, I don't often like being the person that gets to someone who's finished something and go, okay, so what's next? But I'm going to be that person now. You know, when you said, maybe I'll be content when I hit the 29,000 kilometers. So your journey came to an end, and you really spent the last year sort of reflecting back on that, creating your feature documentary, now marinating your thoughts and into the written word. Have you found that contentment came with that number? Are you content with that's it for bikepacking, or this wildfire, that you've taken your 3 pilgrimages that you said each year? Has contentment come about?
This is one I've really been thinking hard on, because in my anti-materialism-esque ethos that I live by, I'm really against more things, acquiring more things, right? But was I acquiring not things, but adventures in that way? Was I having to keep continually acquiring more and more adventures? Was I getting somewhere with it? You'll have to read in the book, because that's a lot of what I'm peeling back here, is how much of this pilgrimage was the outer world and how much of it was the inner world. And so someone recently enlightened me with this. There's nothing that you can find in the outside world that will change what needs to happen on the inside. And I think that rings so true with where I'm at right now, because yes, I'm very content with the amount of incredible places in far off corners and far away cultures of our planet that I was able to see by bicycle. I am so grateful that my legs were able to get me there, that my passport, I have that privilege of a passport that gets me into those places. I am so unbelievably privileged to have been able to see this world by bicycle, to see, 29,000 kilometers of this world by bicycle. I barely scratched the surface, you know? There's so much more to see. And I think now I am understanding this balance of outer experience and inner reflection. And I'm also seeing, this is something that's going to be very interesting in the book, how much it influenced my trip when, and I think a lot of people can relate to this with bikepacking, when you try to control things and when you surrender and let it flow, and let the person you met who just suggested this waterfall you just go see, maybe that's where your day needs to go, instead of sticking to your pre-programmed stops on your GPS app. And in so many ways, I don't think in one leg of my trip more than the other. I think in different days, I look at my journals and I'm like, oh my gosh, this person was trying to control so much. Like all the way down to the mileage that I stopped at, Bella. Like 29,000, like where did that number come from? Like, why do I have to have this tangible, progress-obsessed goal? Like, why couldn't I just be content with that day? And sometimes what I've found is that when I tried so hard, so rigidly to have that power and that control, it did not work out well. The more that I let go, the better my trip went.
Just hearing what you were talking about there about the control and the rigidity of having to hit a certain number or hit a certain distance, it's taken me right to a recent guest, Claire White. Hi, Claire. Gosh, by the time this episode goes out, I think you'll probably be somewhere in China. Claire is currently in Mongolia, just 2 weeks into a journey that's UK to Mongolia.
Whoa,
but
go Claire.
Claire, prior to that trip, did a up, down, all around across Australia, and like very much the road less travelled, very much the isolated road through the outback and no services for days. But Claire at that stage of her trip talks about having the need to plan with rigidity everything about Australia. Like she had a spreadsheet, she had services, she had where is she going to get water, what is her day-to-day going to be, and she had a set route for how she needed to be. And she did say part of that was because she needed to end it by a certain date. But the difference now, marinating is UK to Mongolia, that's all out the window. She doesn't know how long it's going to take. She doesn't know how far she's going to go. And she said one of the serendipitous things about discovering this through journeys herself is that the ability to allow yourself the flexibility to get to somewhere you didn't know existed and decide, I'm going to stay here. I've only ridden 20 kilometres, but I don't care. Or, like you said, meeting someone who says, let's go to the waterfall, and the waterfall didn't exist to you, but you're like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. Now, you talked about, McKenzie, if I bring it back to yourself, you said how you never had a set route, but was it then, once you had this goal of the world, did it become more rigid for a point in time for you then? Did you not have a set route, but did you have a set endpoint for each day, perhaps?
Yeah, how I did it is I really, again, followed my intuition to what continent and country I wanted to go through, had an idea of around roughly how many kilometers I wanted to do there, and then a start and end point. And once I had the start and end points, let's take Australia, for instance. I knew I wanted to go from Melbourne to Perth. And then what I did from there is I didn't program my whole route. I didn't have the rigidity of planning my whole route. Instead, I took it in 1 week chunks. And this could be something that I've taken from my thru hiking days. I don't really know. In a lot of ways, I think of myself as a thru hiker who was just on a bike for 3 years.
Okay, yeah. It's just accelerated distances each day, right?
Tell me if this is normal, because this was my sense of normalcy with it, and how my brain really helped compute this really big, audacious goal into bite-sized chunks. And when I'm talking bite-sized chunks, I would aim, so let's take Oz. So I would aim, I'm leaving from Melbourne. I need to get to Warrnambool. I know that's not 6 days away, but I need to get to X through the Great Ocean Road. Let's go that way. And for the most part, I tried to bike for 6 days straight, take the 7th day off, and use that day to research my next stretch. And what that allowed me was a week buffer with any political situations, which became huge in Africa, and any weather situations, which became huge in South America. And also take inventory on where my body was, how I was feeling, what I needed to fix. I always knew there was like day 7, roughly. Day 7 would be when I would route my next week, and I would kind of prep my whole rig and system for what was to come. But yeah, that's the balance of rigidity and flexibility is such a tough one. I think that it's something that everyone battles with when you're out on this major world tour. And when it came to deciding where I wanted to go, I would say after Africa, once I decided, okay, this milestone of 29,000 kilometers that I want to get to, how am I going to get there? And kind of looked at like the easiest way right in front of me, which was I was going to New Zealand. Okay, so let's ride some of New Zealand. Let's hop on the Tour Aotearoa, which is an incredible route made by the Kennett brothers. There's the Te Areroa, which is the hiking version of the length of New Zealand, and there's the Tour Aotearoa, which is the bike packing version of New Zealand. And both are incredible. Highly suggest them. So that was the first thing I did. And I looked at the amount of kilometers on that, and I said, okay, then where to? And Robin Davidson's Tracks is one of my favorite books for very obvious reasons. When people know that journey, I relate to her in so many ways. So I said, okay, well, I really want to experience the Outback in Oz. Let's do the Nullarbor. Let's look up the Indy-Pacific route, that Mike Hall made famous. And, the endurance bike packing, there's a very big backstory with all of that. But I looked into that route. And so I was going to go from the west to the east, just like everyone does, right? With the wind. But not when I specifically wanted to go in February, which was the heat of the summer. I actually went east to west, which anyone in Oz listening, you're probably like, this girl's crazy, because you were probably fighting a headwind the whole way. But that's not the case in this 1 month weather window.
It's interesting though, coming back to the rigidity of having to hit a mileage or having to figure out the route and stuff. I wonder, had that not occurred, had you not bumped into those people in Africa that told you about 29,000 kilometres and cycling the world, Do you think the rest of this journey would have occurred at all? Do you think you would have returned to being the through hiker and the bike trip, because Cairo to Cape Town was the thing and you finished that and you'd done the mix of everything? Do you think the rest of it maybe would not have happened?
No, I think it still would have happened. That's a really good question. I do think it, again, planted the seed in my brain for this potential for contentness of 29,000 kilometers. But I think regardless, in something that I reflected on a lot while working on an organic farm after Africa. So that is how I saved up my money for these trips, is I would stop and farm. But in the reflection during that process for me, being in this beautiful orchard and again, being amongst nature where I could kind of really listen intently to my inner voice and subconscious, I had so much more to find. I was just getting a preview of what I needed to figure out on a bicycle. So the bicycle for me was like this vehicle for connection. It was this way of seeing the world. And I think that the speed of it was a certain thing, like we spoke about earlier. But I also think it really helped connect me to different cultures. And it helped shake me out of my through hiking had become something that I was more familiar with now. So it helped shake me from that. And what happened in Africa is really, really interesting. I was able to share this with, my person, and that I was so grateful for. But in my individual experience of Africa, and it's really important to note here that Jim, who's from New Zealand, wrote a book about our Cairo to Cape Town journey called The Road South. And
it's a great book, people. Go and seek it out. The Road South. McKenzie calls him Jim. The book cover calls him James Beattie.
Too good. Yeah, so James Beattie wrote The Road South, and it's available on Amazon worldwide. And his recollection and story of Africa is so drastically different than my recollection and story of Africa. And that right there is the beauty of the different unique lenses and perspectives that we all have. So when you go on a bike packing trip with a person, you're going to have two drastically different experiences. And that was one of the biggest questions I got on my film and speaking tour, was how, which was better, going alone or going with Jim? I want to do this big trip. Should I go alone or with someone? And it really depends. So that's a really important side note of Africa. So for me, my perspective of Africa was that I was learning how to truly surrender to uncertainty. I had fooled myself with this myth of I've gone through hiking and I've wild camped on my own and I've done Europe on my own. And I am this individual, solo, strong female who can battle uncertainty. And then we got caught in a military coup in Sudan. I had a spear thrown at me by a tribesman in Kenya, which was, puzzling. And I go into that a lot in the book. Jim was ambushed by a wild elephant in Botswana. I mean, all these things, literally, Africa was so making me so vulnerable. I was so shaken. I mean, I remember going back to Florida after Africa, and I was out on a ride with my folks, just visiting my family, and someone fell, and I started bawling, Bella. Like, I was crying. And it was like all this traumatic, I don't know, I felt so bottled up because I was trying to be so protected. Like me and Jim we tried to stay protected amidst cars and trucks almost hitting us in Namibia. And it was a lot. It was full on. And it's exactly what I needed, because I was able to understand that I had more to make sense of. So I needed to go back to the bike to make sense of that and for it to connect me through more of understanding what all of that was about.
To me, Africa is a continent. It's so starkly different to what we've been brought up with. Our society and African culture, it's such a different mix, which is the beauty of travel, and the beauty of slow travel is learning when you're within it. You see that and you observe it. And all that chaos that occurred in Africa, there would have been so many beautiful things that occurred in Africa as well that you reflect back on as well. I'd love to dig into some beautiful moments of just unexpected quintessential African moments, something that could only happen in Africa, that isn't the chaos of the big elephant or a spear being thrown, but just something that's everyday life that you get to witness and see.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that really sticks out is just the hospitality, right? Being able to stay in people's homes. They had nothing extra to give off their plates, so they gave us their meals. I can think of Tanzania, where people open their adobe homes to us. Egypt, where we were given so much food and ice cream and offers to stay that it felt wrong leaving, but it was only midday and we had to continue. Something that really sticks out to me is Zambia. And this is recent with my journal entries and digging into more than the film even shows, because the film is just a preview to the book, really. So Zambia, and something that wasn't captured on film, is that we would come across these grass huts in northern Zambia, which is not really on the well-followed trodden path of Cairo to Cape Town. Instead of going east to Malawi, we actually went through northern Zambia. And the reason for that, and a lot of people don't realize, that the time we went to Africa, we had to get a PCR test every single border. So logistically speaking, we had so many hoops to jump through. We had to get a PCR test and then quickly hustle within the 48 hours before it expired to the border, cross the border. And Malawi made that a little bit more strict. We had to get an invitation, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a bit more expensive of a visa. Anyways, for whatever reason, I would love to go back to Malawi. We did not go the Malawi way. We went in northern Zambia. And we were able to see and interact with all these very remote huts and small villages that had never seen a foreigner before. Like, the young kids were so cute. They would come out and scream at us and run and chase us, and try and sprint at our speed. And we interacted with them a lot and brought some games and stuff to play with them. But if you're familiar with the book, if the listeners are familiar with the book, Ishmael is one of those books that just is profound. And I read Ishmael after Africa, but it did help me understand a bit of this culture that in this northern Zambia area that we were in, they, even if we were gifting them something, they have everything they need. And it's not necessarily high on GDP, but it's high on GDH, gross domestic happiness, right? So they have this inner working of a community that we have lost a little bit of touch with our modern culture. And so this kind of, maybe I'm from this world of more. Let's buy more, let's consume more, let's extract more from the earth, right? More. And they're from this world of less. No, we're happy with less. We have everything we need. So I know that kind of takes some snapshots to your question, but that's how it boils down for me. And that's what I'm doing right now, is reading in between the lines of what happened on a day-to-day basis, but then actually what did it mean, on a larger sense.
Do you find when you've been on those long journeys, and I want to take you away from Africa and take you to when you were solo, and I'll plop you somewhere, I don't know, let's take you to Bolivia. When you're alone day after day on long stretches on your own, how did not being in your community day after day impact on you there? Because it's one thing to take yourself to a moment to get these experiences, but it's very much another one to take yourself away from your safety net. It's not a bad thing to have a community. It's not a bad thing to be near loved ones. It's not a bad thing to be with your partner. What's it like when you've purposefully taken yourself away from that to experience the thing? But community is key to someone's happiness in Zambia. You're on your own, away from the community. What was that like?
Bella, it's as if you're here right in the book with me. That's the key question with South America, really, because I speak survival Spanish. I wish I was more fluent. So I was unable to reach a depth of conversation. I could do the kind of fleeting passing of, hello, how are you? Maybe make a joke, and non-verbally, that's still 80% of communication, right? So I could still laugh, and laughter was always a big one in terms of kind of disarming and breaking the ice on a conversation. But when it came to community, it was something I really missed right away. And that's incredible that you plopped me in Bolivia because that's where I first felt it, in the salt flats, the world's largest salt flats. This is a very large landmass of a prehistoric lake that is now all salt. So you go to it and you're like, what is this ice? You know, your brain is like just unbelievably the depth perception. You can't see more than the next day. Basically, I wasn't able to see anything. It was this wide open expanse of this white carpet, and I was plopped in the middle of Bolivia. So just like your question, in the Altiplano, pretty high up, barely able to take a full breath, and it is the altitude is a factor, and then the temperature is a factor because at night it gets below freezing. I was completely by myself. I literally wore every single layer of clothing that I owned, that I brought with me. So that included, I want to say, 4 jackets, 2 pairs of pants, 2 pairs of gloves, 2 beanies, 3 pairs of socks. I had it all on when I was sleeping. And then I would wake up in this nothingness and be like, where am I going? My GPS is flat. How do I get anywhere? I can't see. I have no landmark for where I need to go. So what do? I'm on this endless treadmill of nothingness. Well, thankfully, there were 4x4 tracks that I was able to follow to find water at an island. But this was what I was feeling. Your question is what I was feeling in Bolivia is, my gosh, I'm so alone. I can't have a conversation with anyone. I don't know if you can tell by this chat, but I'm a very audible person. I like to connect with people.
And you're only so much fun to have a conversation with yourself for a while too.
Yes. So this was the interesting thing. You dive into your own thoughts because you have no one else to communicate with. So you have to become your own best friend. And I know that sounds cliche, but your thoughts have to be a 99.999% positive because you cannot let any negative, anxiety-prone thoughts get into your head because it's only you out there. So you're almost creating this callus in your brain of becoming a positive-minded person and choosing your thoughts very consciously. With the lack of community, I still had 6,000, I think it was, kilometers from Uyuni salt flats in Bolivia to continue through South America to my finish line. So I'm like, pull up your socks. Like, you got to get through this. Like, you might be feeling lonely, but what it was the perfect landscape for me to make sense of my entire pilgrimage, if you will, right? Like, why am I doing this? And I didn't have anyone else there to distract me with a conversation or take my mind off of it. I had no service. I had no friends with me. My partner wasn't with me. It was only me. So in that, I then continued through Peru and Ecuador and in Colombia. I had this very big revelation of how I feel secure and safe as a woman alone in the wild. I have a line about this in the film, and I talk a bit about this, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. With this book, it's diving much more into that, of this, when you think you're alone, you're actually never truly alone because you're connected to this network of nature and this interconnected network. I have never felt so close. I've never felt so alone. And at the same time, I have never felt so close to the people I loved because I was so grateful as I was biking, thinking of each of them and the roles they've played in my life. And if anyone's out on a tour right now listening to this, like, all you need to do is start thinking of people who you love. And like, you can ride on this for like hours in a flow state of gratitude. And it's crazy how fast your legs can move in that state. So I never felt closer to them. I never felt closer to myself. So yes, to your question, yes, you understand your rhythms. You understand your mind and when it's becoming dangerous and when it's not, and how to program that. I never felt closer to nature. I was drinking from streams. I was waking up to bird sound. I was feeling wild again, like coming back home to our nature, to Mother Nature. Going from mother culture to mother nature, if you will, and realizing at the end of all this that I thought I did this solo, but this was not a solo trip. there's no such thing as being alone.
Actually, I had a quote from you, which is exactly that. It said, I realised that on solo journeys, we're never alone. My journey was possible because of the network of people around me, communities looked after me, my loved ones cheered me on from afar, and the great Mother Nature provided time and time again air to breathe, clean water to drink, sun to warm me, and all the signs for the right path to take. That sort of takes me to the salt flats there and what you were talking about. It also makes me realise like the importance of like positive psychology, and I guess perhaps your self-awareness of that. You know, when you were saying you knew that you're the person that's got to keep you up and pepped up, and there is no backup, there is no reception. Even if you wanted to have that phone call with someone to cheer you up, you couldn't. So you had to be your own entertainment, but your own good thoughts. You were talking about the importance of being positive with yourself, like in self-care and being kind to yourself. When I look at your photos on the Salada Uni, I can see this strong, independent, great solo female traveller who's doing the thing. But something that photos never show is actually how it felt to do the thing. You hinted that there were times where you just felt totally away from your community and alone. In reflection now, over a year since doing the journey, you can say you were never alone because you had all these things, but you had to come to that realisation point. There would have been points where you just naturally felt the pits of the emotions you don't want to feel. What was your shake yourself into, okay, hang on, you can't catastrophise here. You need to get yourself out. You are the problem solver. 6,000 kilometres to go. Like, what were your little things? Like, did you sing yourself a stupid jingle? Like, what did you do?
Yeah, this is something that maybe I've adopted from the David Goggins anthology of his books, but I really, and I think I read that while I was in Australia, really trying to dig deep into a pain cave. But then the lessons really came to fruition in South America. My mental talk was positive, and it was also a toolbox. So it was a toolbox of things, really hard things that I have accomplished in my life, not just on the bike journey, not just through hiking, but could have been a difficult conversation with a friend or family member. It could have been a race that I won back in the day, you know, that I didn't think I was even going to be able to battle this side ache that I had. Or it could have been an overtime goal in soccer and coming back from an injury. But like taking these toolkit moments, these morsels of self-confidence and reminding myself who I was and what I had been capable of in other times of adversity.
Is that something you'd advise for people who are thinking of taking a journey on to maybe do? I'm always hesitant to ask people advice, like give someone advice. A lot of people have said, I don't give advice because it's your own journeys and you need to figure out that step. But there will be people who are thinking, and is that something that you would tell them to put into their back pocket to arm themselves with before they go?
Yes. So something that has really come up on a lot of this film tour as I've been touring my documentary around, I've been doing speeches. So it's been really fun to interact with live audiences. And a lot of people, you know, a good majority of them being women, have come up to me with this exact question of, I'm planning to go from, you know, Oz to Europe, and I don't even know where to start. And, you know, what would be that one kind of piece of advice that you would give? And yeah, I always say you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt, because this is my truth lens that I'm seeing things from. And it's 34 years of piling on different experiences, and I'm going to see things differently than you. And I might gravitate towards going more in the direction of Native communities or Indigenous First Nations. That really intrigues me, whereas your internal compass might take you to really good surf waves, or it might have something else that's really calling to you. So that's what I always say first. And then I say, like, look, we've all been a beginner somewhere. I can tell you all about Vietnam. I can talk your ear off about Vietnam and how I had no idea what I was doing. And now 3 years later, this big goal has been accomplished, but it was accomplished because of these bite-sized chunks along the way. And Yeah, I think advice is really hard because there were so many things I did differently than the masses when it comes to hopping on a bike. Like, again, I didn't route my trip at all. I also made a film without ever having the intention of making a film. So that film was really shot on like a point and shoot most of the time. And it was just to continue this ripple effect and this responsibility that I felt to share these stories. Because if I hadn't have read about Lael Wilcox and Jenny Graham and Robin Davidson and Liz Clark, and these are a lot of my idols that I'm saying right now, if I hadn't heard of all these people and what they did, I would not feel confident in going out to do what I did. So I felt like if I didn't tell my story to people, then was I not continuing this ripple effect and this responsibility I had on my shoulders? So I did a lot of things differently, and that felt good for what I was trying to do the trip for. But everyone is going to go out, and the bicycle is a beautiful vessel for whatever you might want. It might be an escape for moving meditation. It might be fitness and exercise. And it might be going on an overnighter, or it might be a multi-year, heck, even 50-year world tour like Heinz the German. It can open your world in so many ways that I just, when those people come up to me after a speech, I try and ask them the questions of, well, what are you gravitating towards? And why do you want to do this? And, oh, you might want to do it solo. Why? What are you trying to find? And it's not that they're going to have an answer, because I didn't have an answer for 3 years, but those are the questions you need to start peppering yourself with in order to understand what you should go do, is why you want to do it.
Hey listeners, if you're loving the stories and adventures I'm bringing to you each week, consider supporting Seek Travel Ride by buying me a coffee. Your donation helps me keep the show going strong and bringing you even more inspiring content from our guests. Just head over to the Seek Travel Ride Buy Me a Coffee page. Every little bit helps and is deeply appreciated. Plus, it's a great way to show your love for Seek Travel Ride. I've included a link in the show notes. Thanks so much for being part of our community and for your support. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah, and it's the prompting, isn't it? Because that's then what marinates, and that's what you realise. And I guess you talked about creating the film. And actually, we should have a shout out to the film. I've watched it a few times. I'm sure I have listeners of the shows who've watched it. But if you want to give a little bit of a plug there, if people want to listen to the film, how can they seek it out, McKenzie?
Oh, great. So my film is Cycling the World. It's a 34-minute documentary, self-made, self-shot, self-written, self-edited. And then I put it up on Vimeo. So you can go to cyclingtheworldfilm.com and that will take you there, or just go into Vimeo and type in Cycling the World Film. But yeah, I've toured it around the US, around New Zealand, and it is currently in a few film festivals debuting around the world right now.
Because what I was going to say is, like, making the film is one way of looking back and having that footage. I think the great thing now that you're writing the book is you wrote journals during this trip. And so you're coming across things that perhaps you'd forgotten about that you didn't have footage on, that are causing you to reflect and think about this journey that you did take and the thoughts from that as well. Like, how have you found both processes? There's one element where the filmmaking, it really feels natural fit for you because that was your background, that was your occupation, right? You know, making a film is one thing. Now writing, it's very different. It's one thing to write your own journal. It's another thing to condense it into your own non-fiction account of your journey. How have you found the process of both? And because I know I've interviewed guests who've done one or the other, and I've interviewed people who potentially are thinking about it, and some get so far and then they stop. And I want to know what that process has been like.
Okay, this is a great question. And let's start with the film. So the film I made, I want to say 6 months after I finished my ride. And go back and listen to our first conversation, because I need to, first of all, thank Bella for prompting me with the questions that would then marinate with me for months and lead to the development of the film and the book and these understandings. So big thank you to Bella on that podcast. So the film, The film is something that yes, like in the beginning, did not have the intentions of making a film. I actually was seeking out removal from the film industry. I was a bit disillusioned by a lot of it, and I just wanted to, basically what happened is I was a storyteller, telling other people's stories who didn't even know my own. And so that's why I went out into the world on a bicycle, and I didn't bring a film camera. I didn't bring a lot of tech. I just wanted the firsthand experience. I wanted to, if you think about it, remove the camera from my face, remove the devices from my face, and have a real interaction with the present moment. So that is why I went out on this trip. And then in Africa, my family and friends were like, "How's Africa?" And I had no way of talking about writing, articulating what was happening. So I just did what I kind of always knew, which was pull out my camera and start filming. And I had no intention of making anything with it, just to kind of send things back to my family and friends of evidence of what was happening and the beauty of Africa and the biodiversity of Africa. And obviously that's when I started to understand, okay, there might be something here. Funny enough, when I went to New Zealand after Africa, I barely filmed. That is a very small portion of my documentary. And that's because I was still in an inner dilemma of, should I film something? Nah, like let's stick to the original intention, just have the experience. And I wrote more there. I wrote a few articles. And then I went to Oz and I dug into some very deep pain caves to get across Australia in 30 days. This was an endurance challenge for me.
In some nice heat too.
Oh, awful. And so in the heat of the summer. So I filmed that.
How were the flies?
The flies were you never stop. Don't ever stop on the Nullarbor. Don't ever stop. I started to film and I realized I was filming for myself there. I was filming for myself to document who I was and who I was becoming. And then South America happened. And actually something that I don't talk about is in between South America, I went to Nepal for a quick hiking trip. So still always flirting with the through hiking version of myself, right? So then I went over to South America and I had the intentions of making the film. And that is the part of the documentary where things really start to develop as a story. Things like happiness is an inside job and how do I feel as a woman alone in the wild? Those are big moments in the film. But the film was only 34 minutes and my trip was 3 years. So there are a lot of stories that went untold. In a sense, I, as an art piece, wanted to put out a poem to the world. And that's what my film was. It was a visual poem. It was a bit philosophical. It was a bit, vague. It didn't have all the nitty gritty of what happened on a day-to-day basis. And there's a reason for that, because that's what's coming with the book. And so the difference between motion picture and written word is fascinating. And I'm hoping to segue into more of that as an industry as well. I love writing. I think that's why I've always loved film, because I love writing first. What I'm having to do is read through and dissect my journals, my day-to-day of what happened, and read between the lines and understand, alchemize this into discoveries for myself. That's almost my phase one. And now my second phase is making it something that's relatable, ingestible, and captivating for the reader, where they can find that they can relate. Like if you've ever read the book Tracks by Robin Davidson, she's one of my absolute heroes because she did this crazy thing of walking across the outback solo with her camels, but yet you find morsels of information there that are so relatable to your life. That book, I have almost every page underlined something written in the columns. And so how did she do that? That's my idol. That's what I hope to do, is tell you what it was like cycling the world, but through an adventure memoir, allow you to understand how you can relate those discoveries towards your own life.
You know how the film, you didn't set out from Vietnam with the intention of recording, and you mentioned there how in New Zealand you brought it back again because you didn't want to turn it into a film. And so it happened after the fact in a way, or sort of semi-during. The book, was that ever an intention? Like I know that through our previous chat, you definitely wrote day-to-day journals in your through hikes, and it was obviously something that you did for yourself, and you did the same for your world tour. But did you ever set out with the intention of writing a book?
No, I wouldn't say I did. However, subconsciously, yes. So I've always written. Since I was a little girl, I kept composition notebooks, and I've kept a journal my whole life, actually.
Wow. Have you ever gone back to like your really early journals?
I have recently.
Oh, that would be so interesting.
It's a time
It's
capsule.
like every now and then I go back to an early episode of the podcast, and it's the best way to see how much you've changed.
It really is, because a journal is you're writing to yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe I've done it as my own form of therapy and self-love my whole life. But I think in Colombia, I realized that I had a moment that happened on the final day, and I don't want to give it away because it will be in the book, that made me realize that I had this responsibility. And something I mentioned on our first chat, Bella, that is a very much a part of my ethos is pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Those are some of my favorite words by the great Mary Oliver. So I paid attention on this journey. I was absolutely astonished in so many ways and so many depths. And now it's my responsibility to tell about it. And I, want to write this for that person who needs to hear those things. So yeah, I guess subconsciously, it was something that I was always meant to write.
Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. I love that. I want to take you to the second part of that, because I feel like we've paid attention for the whole chat so far. But the be astonished part, and this is a question I've started asking more guests recently, and to be fair, McKenzie, it was probably something that we first chatted about over a year ago, and it's that sense of awe and being in awe. And I feel like being astonished and being in awe are sort of married to each other. And I want you to tell me about a time on your journey, which isn't in the film, that you've rediscovered from your journals in the book where you were in awe.
Oh man, I have so many. I have so many. There's so much that was not in the film, because that wasn't my intention, right? The film was not really my intention. That's why I have to explain so much of it in a narrative with the film. But okay, let's see. That's so difficult. Okay, let's go to one where you definitely didn't see a lot of this in the film, and that's what I just spoke about in New Zealand. New Zealand was really hard for me, which might come as a surprise because New Zealand was the fertile ground of my first through hike on the Tiareroa back in 2015, and my first long distance endurance anything. And I fell head over heels for through hiking. This is before I even knew my partner, Jim. And so in so many ways, New Zealand is my time capsule, and it's my, it's a soul's home in a way. And when I went to New Zealand with this idea of wanting to continue solo cycling to 29,000 kilometers, it was so tough for me because Jim was there and his family was there. And I had to somehow pry myself away from my comforts being so close, like a few hours drive away. And I think that's almost harder than flying across the world to Africa, to Australia. Australia was a lot easier. So I want to give a nod to that New Zealand bit that you don't see in the film, and that will play a big role in the book. Let's take you to the ice cold rain of the Haast Pass. And
I know the Haast Pass.
Yeah.
I've been there. And actually, it was pretty cold when we were there too.
Yeah, so it's freezing cold. You're waking up so cold. At that time, I was cold soaking still. I don't know why I was cold soaking so much, but it was all because of being lightweight and not having a lot of things. So I went for a lighter setup. Did not bring, for those of you who aren't familiar, cold soaking is just not using heat to make your meals. So I would just have a Talenti or peanut butter jar and just mix in some cold coffee and cold oats and just chug it down and get up Haas Pass. It was not easy, and it was really slippery and pretty sketchy on the uphill. But then I crossed into the official Otago at the very top, the Otago region. And I realized like there's a point where you need to cross from your comfort zone, but from your convenience lifestyle into adventure. And it's a jump off point, and you're cold and you're hungry and your food's not hot and you didn't sleep right and your back hurts and your legs are pulsing and everything is telling you to go back home, take a warm shower. You tried, you told people you would do it. That pretty much checked the boxes. You don't have to put yourself through this pain. It's so much pain, right? Just quit and go home. And there's a difference between the quitting and surrendering side of things. But this is a time to quit, right? Like just go back to your convenience. And then there's the other side, this whole new region, this downhill of, I have no idea what it's going to be, but I'm going to choose it. I'm going to choose this shaky, unfamiliar uncertainty. And so that is like the physical representation for me of, at that point, I decided like, keep going to 29,000. And you need to leave your comfortable self and kind of push and discover what more depths that you have. Of course, in New Zealand, I get a flat tire, my only flat tire, 6 kilometers from the finish line down in Bluff. And so that's like a very poignant time for me. It's like, right when you think you're doing everything right and your ego's all swollen, it's like, nope.
It's the back tire, right?
Oh, back tire. Yeah. Cycling gods are just going to smack you one. So that happened to us in Africa too. We both got flat tires on our last day. And so that's really always funny with the ego. You think you got it all figured out, but no. But I also think that like in those pain caves, in the depths of like this, I have a 2-week theory. If you can get past 2 weeks of the first adventure, then your body understands what to do. And you're more callous towards what your day-to-day is. And you can start to dive into the mind after about 2 weeks, give or take, depending on how much you put in before leaving for the journey. These pain caves, like I'm fascinated with this right now, the science of like these pain caves and how when you access deeper pain caves, you're actually able to regenerate parts of your biology. And basically that's when they talk about like rewiring your brain, because you're understanding more of these depths of what you're capable of. Like you're hitting these new levels, right? And so I think that that's really hard, and people don't talk about how hard that is to make that shift into the new region of wanting to do that.
Something you talked about there with New Zealand, going through the Haas Pass, reaching the border of Otago, and then having to push yourself to not go back to the comforts of familiarity, family, friends, community, and, hit the get me out of here button, but to push yourself forward and to continue on. It makes me think about, personally, what does the word adventure mean for me? And the unknown comes in a lot of the time as well, because for me, if you're going on an adventure, you're seeking an unknown outcome, because otherwise it's not an adventure, because you know what to expect. It's the unexpected to me. But if I was to ask you, McKenzie, like, Mac, if you had to define adventure, how do you define it?
I really like your definition, Bella. First of all, that's a great definition.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's twofold. Before this bike journey, I would have defined adventure as something unpolished, something that is an epic journey, maybe a voyage of the outer world. But now, because I'm no longer on adventure of an outer world, right? I think it's anything that makes you aware and notice what's happening on your inner levels and putting yourself at the mercy of uncertainty, of the unknown, and then allowing it to shape you. So I think that in that sense, if you're unable to move physically, you can still go on an adventure. If your passport doesn't allow you to go to faraway corners. You can still go on an adventure.
It's sort of allowing yourself to be uncomfortable, into the discomfort, embrace what's going to happen, embrace the changes.
Absolutely. And that's where type 2 fun comes from, right? Because type 2 fun in the moment, it's awful. Yeah, it's after the fact. It lies in the hard work and the reflection.
So this is a great question for you then, because you've spent years, probably tally up your trips, and it's literally years of out there in the adventure, and you've spent the best part of the last year talking about it, filming, like creating, sharing the story with others. It's almost like you're still within it, if that makes sense. Like, to me, my observation is this is part of your identity now, and so you have been sharing the story for the past year. You're in it, you're on a film tour. But I also know that it's one thing to be creating work, be creating art in whatever manifest, sharing it with the world, speaking about it, living it, breathing it, getting asked the similar questions from different people each day. There's a beauty in that, but there's also the part of McKenzie Barney who is the adventurer who goes to seek it out. So how have you found balance in living within something that's occurred but not being out there doing the things on your own, if that makes sense as well?
I think it has to do with your last question about what is adventure. I think that, and that's a great transition question because, and everyone, it's usually the first question people ask at these events. What's next? Because and we can't help it. I always want to ask what's next to my idols, like when you hear someone sharing this tale, you're like, oh, there's got to be more. There's got to be next. And I wonder sometimes if that has to do with our obsession about progress sometimes. And that's something I'm really reflecting on in the sense of our culture, in the sense of my own inner balance. How progress obsessed have I been? And I'm realizing that for so much of my life, I've maybe tipped the scales a bit on going out and adventuring and need a little bit more stillness to make sense to the type 2 fun we were just talking about, to make sense of what those meant. And that is an adventure. It's almost harder because you're not out there and your ego isn't you're not in the public eye. You're not, I'm not on social media right now because I want to remove myself from the crowd approval element of it. And I want to understand why I did this and what the story truthfully is. And so, yeah, when you're not out there doing something epic, and so many of us can relate to this, there are ebbs and flows of life. You're not always on adventure. You got to work sometimes. You got to save up some money. You might have something that you need to deal with your family. You might have something you need to deal with on a health basis. Or in my case, yes, I am in Thailand and this is technically traveling, but this is sort of how I live for just a few months, being in one place. So I am writing, and that is my adventure. And speaking to crowds, how nerve-wracking. That was my adventure. How uncertain. You don't know what questions are going to be asked. You don't know how people are going to perceive you, but you put yourself out there anyways. You show up, and that's an adventure. The film, putting a piece of art out into the world, that is a total adventure. So I'm trying to find adventure in things that might not have to be these big, epic outer journeys, if you will.
Is there also a realization, we talked about the word contentment, being content, not having to chase the extra thing. Is there also a realization of, what all these trips have meant to you, what that means, how understanding your own self and just understanding outlooks change as well? There's an element where what you do doesn't need to be a big adventure. You can be the person that's content with the idea that you're learning about the world. It doesn't have to be on a bike. It doesn't even have to be on a through hike. You can go travel if that's what you enjoy. You can learn about different things. So that's possibly happened organically for you as well?
Absolutely. And I think the key right there is being content, not being complacent. The key is right, is like our brain wants routine and habit because it's easy. And finding when you do need that, because you might need to recover from something. Like I know after South America, I was shattered. Same with Africa. Physically, I was shattered and I needed routine to build my health back up, to be able to handle another leg of the trip. And maybe now that's what I'm doing, like mentally, is building that kind of healthy self-dialogue through these pages and through, the stream of consciousness with going through these journals. But I think it's an interesting time, and I think that you can find bits of a journey, of a voyage, of something challenging anywhere. You just can't get complacent, right? Because it's the comfort. That's the real evil. There's a lot of depth to that, right? A lot of what you and I can really relate to is this calling for the unknown, because in there, in the unknown, is some version of yourself that you're meant to meet. But that can also look like contentness, I'm finding right now.
Contentness, comfort, complacency, the 3 C's. There we go. McKenzie, you're writing your book at the moment. I have no comprehension of if you'd even be aware of a release date, but there will be people listening who want to dig into your story. What's going to be the best way for them to be up to date, to know when you've released it, to find out more? How can they find you out there?
That is kind of the question mark right now. My hope is if I am going to self-publish this book, it will come out by the end of 2024, so the end of this year, hopefully. I mean, that's the goal, right? I'm in the process of it now. But also I am pitching publishers as well. So if that is how this story needs to come out to the world, I'm unsure. Right now, you've hit me at a really kind of interesting time of the actual writing of the manuscript. So I think this is maybe a bit of insight that a lot of authors don't really open their door to and show. But I really think this is a big thank you to you in terms of the inquisitive prompting that you helped set my path on after getting done with this journey. And now what a formulative time to loop back in a year later and check back in. And now it's not the making of a film like back then. Now it's making of a book. So I'll just point people to cyclingtheworldfilm.com or my social media at McKenzie Barney on Instagram, and there will be updates there.
Great. And listeners, I will provide links to all of that in the show notes as well, so you can track McKenzie. McKenzie, I still need to get a copy of the book. It has to be hand-signed and maybe hand-delivered.
You got it. Okay, in Oz or in the mountains? I'm going to go for the mountains.
Oh, I think you have to come to the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
Seriously. What a better setting for a book. We'd have to do session number 3. So I get to read things and then ask questions about your findings from that as well. Actually, it's interesting because something that happened through interviewing you is, since interviewing you, I created a music playlist, which was a suggestion from you. And so we now have a music playlist, Seek Travel Ride, on Spotify, Apple Music, which is a song chosen by every single guest interviewed on Seek Travel Ride. You were there, McKenzie, as the first song on the list, Girl Is on Fire by Alicia Keys. I know you've already got a song, but you've been interviewed twice, so you get to choose another song. What song are you going to choose to be the soundtrack to your adventure? How has that marinated since the last just over a year?
Oh, I love that you started that. Thank you so much for starting that.
Gosh, it's like nearly 5 hours long. It's ridiculous. If you're going for a really long through hike or a ride and you need some company with an eclectic mix, go seek it out.
Amazing. I'm so excited to give this a listen, and I'm going to add Lily Miola's Daydream to that.
I do not know this song, so this is going to be fun for me to listen to. Why did you choose that song?
It's when you listen to the lyrics, you'll understand why. It's all about not quitting your daydreams and following the life of your dreams, no matter what people say, and no matter how much you get caught in normalcy, to still have the bravery to step into your daydream. And that's actually, I listened to that song before most of my speeches, just to get me in the right mindset of like why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, talking in front of people, big crowds of people, like I think the largest was 120, 150, watching my film and then hearing me speak. And, that's everyone gets a little bit scared doing that. And so I think listening to that song really would help me just kind of understand that I was speaking for a reason and I was spreading these messages for a reason. And if it was just the one or two women or men who would come up to me after with tears in their eyes, telling me, sometimes vaguely, but sometimes like about something they were battling or their bike trip they wanted to take or something they've always wanted to do. And now this has been their sign to do that. If that's why I speak to crowds is for that connection and to help light that fire, then I'm happy that I'm doing it and that song helps inspire me to continue.
You were down. I've got you there. You're there on the list twice. Final two questions. These are normally the same, but I've already asked them for you. And I must admit, coming into getting close to episode number 100 now of long-form guest interviews, I'm feeling that if a guest appears on the show more than once, we get to change these questions up. So it's going to be quickfire still. And as I'm thinking on the fly, I'm going to go with, you're giving a choice one day. You can ride all day forever in cold soaking rain. Or, alternatively, you can be on a warm, sunny day but have to ride on really rough, corrugated, bumpy roads. Which one are you going to take?
Oh, there's so many dependents, like what's around. But I'm going to go with the corrugated roads. Yeah.
The corrugated roads.
I've really not taken a liking to being soaked in rain, probably because my recent experience in South America and the battle of always trying to dodge hypothermia. Like when you're soaked to the bone in rain, it can get dangerous real fast.
I get that. Corrugated roads. Where was the place you had the worst corrugated roads?
Africa, for sure. I'd say Tanzania really sticks out. And yeah, it becomes a hike-a-bike real fast.
Okay, next question. Oh, this is going to sound so silly, but it's very, very apt and on point for you, McKenzie. You're given a choice. You're going to go on another adventure. And it will be 6 months. Would you choose to do this adventurous 6 months bike packing, or would you choose to go on a 6-month through hike?
That is so tough. Can I go through in 3?
Nope.
I can't. Okay. All right. You know what? I'm gonna choose bike packing, and I would take it very slow, and I would not do long days, and I would enjoy the camping element a lot more.
And just because I get to be that person that asks the annoying question, where would you take that 6-month trip?
The Tour Divide really, really calls to me because if anyone has watched the film or is familiar with my route, there's one continent missing, and that's my home continent.
Okay, I wonder if that's a little hint.
I don't know. I don't know if it is a hint. But right now the bike is in the garage, and yeah, I don't know about the next bike trip, when that will be. But I'm just happy to go with it.
It may not be. You may not take a next bike trip. That doesn't matter. But yeah, maybe the Great Divide mountain bike route is calling you. We'll watch this space. I wonder if you go north-south or south to north.
That being said, like the Silk Road Mountain Race in Kyrgyzstan, the Italy Divide, I mean, there's so many there are a few parts of Wyoming specifically really interest me. Alaska really interests me. So if you let me piece up those 6 months, I would be everywhere.
Yeah, I like this as a new question, by the way. I'm going to have to figure out a way to marinate that one. Oh my gosh, McKenzie, it's time to wrap the show up. And I always finish speaking with you just with a hit of wanderlust and really insights. We always go deep and a bit psychological on these discussions, which is always really, really cool as well. I've enjoyed being able to dig deeper into some of those stories that you've really only reflected on through the benefit of time having passed as well, being able to read your journals and be able to get into some things that weren't in the movie that will be in the book and your key learnings as well. Whether you take an adventure through hiking, whether you take an adventure biking, whether you go for 6 months on the Great Divide mountain bike route, or maybe you'll sign up for an ultra on the Silk Road mountain race, I will certainly be watching. I look forward to my book delivered here in the Pyrenees one day. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the show for Seek Travel Ride.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bella. It's an absolute honor. It's so fun to chat with you. And from the mountains in Thailand to the mountains in the Pyrenees, all the best. And I can't wait to chat to you next time.
Well, listeners, I really hope you enjoyed channeling back in there with McKenzie and hearing some of her perspectives now, being able to reflect back on that cycling the world journey with it being further into the distance now, reconnecting with her more than a year since her travels and just hearing the insights. Also listening to someone talk about their journey and how they have molded it into being able to share it across many different narratives, both with the film, which I highly encourage you to seek out, called Cycling the World. There's links in the show notes, and this upcoming book of Mackenzie's as well. I feel the book will definitely dive deeper into some of the backstory, but the film is such a beautiful, beautiful watch as well. I really enjoyed, especially just the visual feast of, there was a perspective that this journey did take McKenzie all around the world. There were different cultures, different images, and it was also just seeing McKenzie sort of change and grow through that journey as well. Really thank McKenzie for coming on the show again and for sharing her story with us here as well. And one of the takeaways, which I'm going to shout out again, and if my memory serves me correctly, I think I pulled this quote out after the first trip. It's probably because it's one that McKenzie uses, and it's pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Where will we go next on our adventures where we need to pay attention, be astonished by what we're experiencing, and then tell others about it? It's everything that Seek Travel Ride is all about. Now, if you are enjoying listening to Seek Travel Ride, be sure to sign up to our Seek Travel Ride newsletter. You will get Seek Travel Ride news delivered to your inbox, letting you know who upcoming guests are going to be, as well as news from within the community. In 2025, I will be running some organised Seek Travel Ride bicycle tours. So if that's something that you would like to look into, sign up to the newsletter and you can find more details about it there. There is a link in the show notes for the newsletter sign up. Sign up to that and get Seek Travel Ride news delivered to your inbox each and every month. And as always, until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.